Good afternoon. We'll get started here in just a moment. Well, good afternoon and welcome to our next webinar in our property owner webinar series. And this webinar is going to cover taxing entity budget, tax rates, and tax bills, and how you can impact your tax bill. And as a reminder, there is a Q&A button in the webinar. And if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, feel free to put those in the Q&A and we'll circle back to those at the end. So the first thing we really need to understand is just some property tax system basics. And there's really three main players in the Texas property tax system. And we hear all the time, especially down at the Capitol, Texas has one of the best property tax systems, and we do, but it is a complex system and it's important to understand the basic functioning of it. So those three main players who play a key impact on the property tax system in Texas. The first is the appraisal district, which is our office, and the appraisal district determines market values. Then we send out a notice of appraised value each year, starting in April. We handle all of the protests for the property owners who disagree with that market value that we've set. And then we administer thousands of exemption applications each year. The second player in the property tax system, and probably the most important, is the taxing units. And those taxing units are your city, your county, your school districts, water districts, municipal utility districts. And those taxing entities, they set a budget to provide services, and then they set a tax rate to fund that budget. And ultimately, they determine your overall property tax burden. The third player is the tax office. And in Travis County, the tax assessor collector is Celia Israel, and her office calculates and mails property tax bills. You'll get those starting in November each year, and your taxes are due by January 31st. They also collect all of those payments. They handle a slew of other tasks as well. Their office is very busy, but they handle things like vehicle registrations, license plates, voter registration, disability placards, and court costs. And the property tax calendar is an annual calendar. It starts on January 1 each year. And the Texas Constitution and the Texas Property Tax Code gives the appraisal district the mandate that we appraise at 100% of market value as of January 1st of each year. So that kicks off that property tax calendar each year. We value all of the properties in Travis County, and then usually beginning around April 1st, we start sending out notices of appraised value. And this notice will provide key information on your property, including the market value, any exemptions that you're entitled to. And then if you get that notice and you disagree, you have the opportunity to protest. And generally the protest deadline is May 15th. And then we go through the summer months and we hear the thousands of property owner protests. This year we had almost 210,000 protests that we heard throughout the summer. And by July 25th each year, the appraisal district has to certify an appraisal roll. And this roll that's been certified gets sent to all of the taxing entities. And then they use that data to set their tax rate and set a budget. And that process is the process we're in right now. So they've gotten their appraisal roll and they are going through the budget process and the tax rate process. If during that process they determine that they want to go to a voter approval tax rate election, meaning they're going above what the state automatically allows them to do, then those are on the November ballot. And then in November, property tax bills begin getting mailed to all the property owners. And again, your taxes are due by January 31st. They become delinquent on February 1st of each year if they're not paid. And there's three main factors that you need to determine a property tax. The first is the appraised value, and that's the value that's set on January 1 of each year that the appraisal district sends you in your notice of appraised value. The second are any exemptions that you or the property might be entitled to, such as a homestead exemption or an over 65 or disabled persons exemption. And then the third is the tax rate. And this rate is set by the taxing units, those cities, counties, school districts. And you could be taxed by multiple taxing entities, but that tax rate ultimately is what's determining your burden of the tax. The purpose of the appraisal in our Texas property tax system is really just to allocate the tax burden fairly so that someone with $100,000 house isn't paying the same amount of taxes as someone with $1 million house. And to calculate your tax, you take the taxable value of the property, and that's just the appraised value that we set, less any exemptions. So you take the taxable value of your property times the tax rate. And again, that tax rate is set by each taxing entity. So you would then sum up all of those totals to get your total tax burden. And this concept of truth in taxation came about, and the Texas Constitution affirms it. But what is truth in taxation? And really, it's the local taxing entities need to make taxpayers aware of how their budgets and tax rates will impact them. And we've seen this in at least the last 4 legislative sessions. There's been a big push for transparency and truth in taxation and that process. And we'll continue to see that. We've seen it even some during this first called special session. And so it's really important to the legislature to make sure that property owners and taxpayers understand their services they're getting and how those tax rates are going to impact them. So this concept of tax transparency came about. And through this process, the Truth in Taxation website was developed. It is, if you go to texas.gov/property tax, each county appraisal district manages a website for their county. And so ours here in Travis County, you can go directly to travistaxes.com. And it allows you to put in your property information, so your name, your address, or your property ID, and get information on how tax rates are going to actually impact your specific property. And here's a snip of what that looks like. You can see it'll provide you your property ID, your owner name, the address of the property, and then the market value for your property. Oh, one thing that's really a cool feature we added last year is in the upper right-hand corner, there is a register button. And you can register, you only have to do it once, but if you register for notifications, you'll get emails whenever one of your taxing entities updates information. So if they put a proposed tax rate into the system, you'll get an email letting you know that they've done that and that you can go onto the site and check out how that proposed rate is going to impact you. So the first thing you're going to see when you put in your property information is a summary. And so you can see here, we give you what your prior year taxes were. So based on the adopted tax rates from each of the taxing entities. And then we're going to give you a column that shows you the no new revenue rate. And this is a really important rate. The no new revenue rate is kind of like a reset button. So it takes last year's budget and their tax rate and looks at this year's new values. So if property values increased, that no new revenue rate gives them the same amount of revenue as last year. And ideally, it's like a seesaw. So if your value goes up, the tax rate goes down, or vice versa. Values go down, like we're experiencing right now, the tax rate increases. So we give you what that no new revenue rate would be. So if they didn't increase taxes, that's what your tax bill would be this year. And then we give you in that third column what they're proposing as their tax rate and how your tax bill would be impacted. You can see in this example, Pflugerville ISD, it shows not available. And you may see that because they have deadlines they have to meet, but they may not get the data entered all at the same time. So if you see not available on one of your entities, check back in a few days or sign up for those, register for those notifications. And once they enter their tax rate, their proposed rates, you'll get an email. It'll let you know it's available. And overall, if you look at the 2024 column and the 2025 proposed, that's going to be your year-to-year change in your tax bill. So to go over just a few of those terms, the 2024 tax rate, that's going to be last year's adopted tax rate. So they went through this full process, adopted the rate, and that's what you paid your 2024 tax bill on. The 2025 no new revenue rate, again, is that reset button. So it's the tax rate that that would be needed to bring the same revenue as last year. The voter approval rate is the tax rate limit. So for example, municipalities, they have a 3.5% cap on their rate. And so that voter approval rate is the maximum tax rate they could set without going to the voters and ask them if a higher tax rate's okay. The 2025 is their proposed rate, is the rate they're actually proposing. And so sometimes you'll see this rate is higher than the voter approval rate. That would indicate that they're going to go out for a voter approval tax rate election and ask the voters if that tax rate is okay. And then the 2025 adopted tax rate is going to be the rate that the taxing entity adopts through resolution, either through their governing body passing a resolution and adopting that tax rate. Okay, so you can see here on the left-hand side, you've got a couple modules that you can click. The first one is for the rates. So you're going to see your taxable value and what you paid last year in taxes. And then it's going to show you all those terms we just covered. So it's going to show you the 2024 tax rate and what your tax bill was. Then it's going to show you what the no new revenue rate is, the rate that would give them the same amount of revenue as last year. You'll see what they're proposing their rate to be under the 2025 proposed column. And then the difference, and that's going to be the difference in your tax bill with the proposed and what you paid last year. The voter approval rate, again, is that rate where they would have to go out for election if they go above that rate. And then you can see here, the 2025 adopted is not published because they have not adopted a rate yet. The second button on the left-hand side is for hearings. And this will give you the date, time, and location of the budget hearing and the tax rate hearing, which are, it's so important for us to be involved in those two. As property owners and taxpayers, you know, we have in our office, we see thousands of property owners each year protesting their value. And you may go to a tax rate or a budget hearing and see 10 people. You're telling your elected officials what services you think are important, which that you don't think are that important. And if you think the tax rate is okay, you can give them feedback by going to those meetings. So it gives you all of the information you need if you wanted to attend those meetings. It also gives you contact details. So if you want to go to their website and look at the full budget, if you want to email them regarding the budget, it gives you all that information there. You can see their budget and their tax rate calculation, how they came to those rates by clicking on that worksheet PDF. And then it gives you the assessor's information. It also gives you a recap of some historical data. And so it looks at past years, what the no new revenue rate was, what the voter approval, proposed, and adopted rates were. So you can kind of see what the historical trend has been with each taxing entity. And then that final button, you can provide feedback through this website to the taxing unit. So you can leave comments regarding the tax rate, the budget. If you want to have them call you or email you, you can provide your contact information. And they go into our website and they check those comments as they're going through this process and adopting budgets and tax rates. If you have an over 65 or disabled persons exemption, you have a school district tax limitation or a tax ceiling. So it freezes those school taxes. There are a few other entities that also offer a tax ceiling, but the school districts are mandated by state law to provide that. And you can click that tax limitation button in the bottom right-hand corner to see the tax ceiling amount. And it'll look something like this. It'll tell you which year your taxes were freezed in. And then if you didn't have that exemption, what you would pay in taxes. So this November, there will be several taxing entities that will need to go out for voter approval for items that'll impact your tax bill. There's two ways they do this. There's bonds, and so bonds just allow taxing entities to fund projects. Before they issue those bonds that could impact your tax bill, they have to get voter approval on the bond project. And then the second is a voter approval tax rate election. And you may hear this called a VATER. And this is just if the taxing entity chooses to go above that voter approval tax rate, then they will go to the voters and ask them if they can go above that tax rate. Right now, we are aware, it does appear City of Austin will likely go out for a VATER. They're actually having meetings today to discuss that. And then it looks like Manor ISD will be going out for a bond project. So as the month goes on through August and the beginning of September, those plans will be finalized. And so check on your taxing entity websites that it'll be very prominently posted if they're planning to go out for a VATER or a bond election. And so you can see all those. And other items that are on the ballot this November that are really important, the legislature passed additional property tax relief in the 89th legislative session. They increased the homestead exemption from $100,000 in value to $140,000. And they increased the over 65 and disabled persons exemptions from 10,000 to 60,000. So those are both really big increases, but they do require, because it's a constitutional change, that the voters approve it. So you'll see that on the November election, and you can vote to go ahead and approve those exemption increases. There's also an increase for business personal property exemptions. This was House Bill 9 in the 89th legislative session. And for personal property, it exempts $125,000 of value from those accounts. So all three of those will be on your November ballot, and you'll get the opportunity to vote on those. And again, it's so important that we're involved in our local budgets and tax rates. And that's where we really can see the impact. It affects your tax bill personally. And it's the services that you're getting. So you have a voice, and I encourage you to get involved in this process. Budget hearings are going on right now through August and September. And also that election is coming up where we're going to get to vote to increase those exemptions and get substantial property tax relief. So make sure you're registered to vote. The last day to register is October 6th. And then the election day is November 4th. So it's our duty as property owners and as members of Texas that we go out and we vote, and we also let our locally elected officials know what's important to us. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will start going through those. So there's a question on how market value is determined. And that is, I will not go into the weeds, but essentially market value is what a property would sell for on the open market. So there are three methods that appraisal districts that are outlined in the tax code that we use. The market or sales comparison approach looks at properties that have sold within your neighborhood that are similar. And then for newly built properties or kind of unique properties, there's the cost approach, which looks at how much it would cost to build it. And then for commercial properties, there's an income approach where it looks at your revenue and expenses to determine a value. And so one thing we hear a lot is, well, my market value went down, but I still saw an increase. If you have a homestead exemption, or now there's a circuit breaker limitation, and it gives you a limitation on the value growth each year. So through 2021, 2022, we saw substantial value increases through the COVID pandemic. And after that, some of our properties saw a 54% increase in value in 1 year. And so their market value, that capped limited value, the net appraised value, is still catching up because they have a homestead and it's limited to 10% per year, but their market value may have gone down. So always check those two numbers. It's right there on the first page of your notice of appraised value. There was a question about when a budget goes into effect, and I think that's an important one to address. And it depends on each taxing entity. So each different municipality or city, county, they all have different fiscal years. Some of them are October 1st, some of them are on a January 1, some of them are even on a July 1st. So it really depends on each taxing entity, and you can usually find that pretty easily on their website. Okay, well, we don't have, oh, I got one more that came in. What tips could I give someone who is on a budget and wants to plan for their property tax bill? I always assume the worst and then and plan for that scenario. And hopefully I'm not surprised at the end of the day. All of our staff in our office, we're struggling with the same thing. There's a huge affordability issue in Austin, and I would assume that a tax bill is going to increase every year. The rates can go up 3.5% each year. So I would probably assume that that's what's going to happen each year, or maybe even assume a higher increase each year. And then at the end, if they adopt something lower, then you're pleasantly surprised and you've saved a little extra. We're all dealing with inflation, and the taxing entities are too. It's costing them more to provide those services that we all want. So it's important. I don't think there'll be a situation where tax rates decline. I would plan for them to increase each year just because of inflation. All right, well, there are no other questions. I appreciate you all attending today, and get out there, tell your taxing entities and your elected officials how you feel about the services and the tax rates, and vote on November 4th for those historic property tax relief that we all are wanting. Thank you. Have a great day.